So good morning, Canadian retail. I am very happy to be here with you this morning, both for the fact of it as well as not being on a plane is kind of a nice change. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to share with you my thesis on why retail reinvention, in fact, itself needs to be reinvented, and what you should take note and why you should care. Retail reinvention begins when you conclude that you need to change. And then you get on with the business of changing and, in fact, reinventing. Whatever your reasons, it might be changing consumer behavior, new competitors, loss to online channels, any number of reasons, and often multiple reasons. Retail reinvention is about creating the most powerful and relevant version of yourselves, of your brand, and in so doing, accelerating value creation. So we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning. Here's a few things to start. The most successful retail reinventions come about by getting clear on three very simple things. Which customers are we focused on and why? Fully half of brand strategy is that. Which customers? What do we intend to be to them? Ideally centered on a broader purpose. A purpose that goes beyond a functional role and gets into something more important. And thirdly, what we will actually do better than anyone else. You can think of this as the holy trinity of retail reinvention. You know, these things coming together, in a way, provide a North Star, that which can lead you to many good things. A stronger proposition, competitive advantage, a differentiated customer experience. While cost cutting may be important, and in today's environment, there's lots of that going on, cost cutting is not going to get you to the retail heavens, but a North Star truly can and will. So how do you think about that in regards to defining a North Star? You know, most retailers that we've had the pleasure of working with and that we study in our work really get the customer part, generally. And we're action junkies in retail, and so we get the action part, usually. Maybe not always doing things differently, but certainly doing lots of things. But it's the part in the middle I'd like to draw your attention to, which is the what do we intend to be part. It's remarkable how many retailers have not articulated well what they stand for, what they intend to be, what their purpose is in the world beyond the transactional, before they start making all kinds of changes. So ask the question that's obvious, how do you define what you want to become? Well, let's look at a point of view from an unlikely brand guru. I was never a huge fan of Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead, but he said something really insightful, and that is you do not merely want to be considered just the best of the best, you want to be considered the only ones who do what you do. Nicely said, becoming the only ones who do what you do. So let's bring that to ground in retail. That means people will walk by or drive by or click by other options, other choices to get to you because what you do is most relevant to them. And that's a good place to be. Now in that, of course, is the differentiation part. So you can maybe think of it as crazy, but doesn't differentiation call on us to do things actually differently? And yet, in the world out there of retail, there is so much sameness. And I would say at the root of it is almost a slavish adherence to category norms. We do it this way because that's how it's always done. We show up this way because that's the way we do it in our category. Well, I would respectfully say hogwash. As far as I can see, there's no business case for sameness, and there's very little reward for it. And it's kind of insane behavior when you think about it, because if your expectation is to change the game, then doing things the same way probably is not going to be, you know, the road to prosperity. And doing things even worse, the same as your competitors, is probably matching this definition. So there's also no case for waiting too long. What you're seeing unfold on the screen here is the life cycle of brands, the start and the growth and the maturity and the decline. What you'll notice from the left to the right is the compression of time is shortening. What we're seeing in retail categories across the board is that life cycle, which used to be some years long, is getting shorter and shorter. And once decline begins, you'll notice another thing about this diagram on the right in the pink is the decline is steeper when it starts. It comes faster. So the art of this is to really see the curve ahead as soon as you possibly can. And I like the expression, the curve in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to negotiate the turn. It's to your advantage to know the moment to reinvent or to begin reinvention. And it's usually, ironically, at the moment when you're doing so well. In fact, just before that. When everything is going great, look at how well we're doing, look at the momentum we have, look at the money we're making, you are probably already on your way to decline. And that is a sad but true reality. So let's paint a picture. I want to put a few things in context here, and we'll go into the heart of this. You know, let's say, that you have to change. And you have concluded that incremental change will probably come up short. And wisely, you've decided at this moment, whenever that is, that you want to be something more than Me Too. Maybe you were listening to Grateful Dead records on the weekend. You say, you know what, I don't want to be Me Too. I want to be one of those brands that is in motion, that has momentum, that people are talking about and shopping at, and is absolutely just crushing it. So the obvious question then is, now what? Well, as action junkies, once we've decided something has to happen, we get on with it. And we may say, okay, well, great, we need to change. Now we need a strategy. My guess would be that everyone in this room has some experience with strategic development leading to reinvention. And it's a process that typically unfolds in a very similar way, depending on where you happen to be. And the process leads you to strategic conversations, to decisions that generate transformational actions over time. And I'll show you what it looks like typically. There may be variations in this, but the steps you go through, starting on the left, is gather up all the facts you can and analyze them. Start a process of rationally determining what your strategy is. Usually it's a few people, CEO, CFO, head of strategy if there is one, maybe a few others, usually an outside partner that's helping to do this. And then that strategy, rationally built, is then sold in effectively to a small group of people, and then eventually a cascade begins. And then if you keep moving down from left to right, you find that all sorts of manner of briefings start to happen, creative briefings, store design, assortment planning, all the kinds of things that have to happen, and then eventually through to execution. So this probably is roughly familiar if you've been in that situation before, and it is tried and true. The only problem is it is seriously flawed. I'm going to tell you in just a few points why that is. It comes down to two. It's based on false truths that aren't relevant today, and it's way too slow. So false truths. The conventional process of defining strategy that leads to retail and reinvention was invented in a different time with a different set of realities. And it rests on truths that are no longer productive. So let's just look at what those are. First one, facts, not feelings. So it goes like this. Facts are absolute and unassailable, and the feeling side, insights, intuition, imagination, creativity, if present at all in the strategic process, are seriously suspect. There is only one unassailable truth in facts. To truly be a fact, it has to be history. And the future is invented, not predicted, and that takes more than facts. Let's look at another truth. We'll get everyone aligned later. Don't worry about that. So a small set of the leadership team gets together and they craft strategy. Sometimes it's people working off-site, and they bring it back and they make a case and they say, okay, this is where we're going to go and this is why, and it's all very supportable in fact. The functional leaders, many of them, those who actually control the levers of customer experience and proposition, are often outside of that process. They're the ones who kind of get sold in a bit later. And even in some cases, the enablers, those people that make the customer-facing action possible, IT, supply chain, those folks are out of it generally as well. So there's one part of human nature that's missed in all of this, and that's really a profound one. We support that which we help create. So there's an issue there. Another favorite of mine is we'll all get creative later. We do the rational stuff first, and we'll let the creative folks come in a little bit later down the road. We'll let them know where we're going, and then they'll do their thing. Has anyone noticed lately how important creativity, design, and innovation is today in creating business value? The current process leaves those who think differently and connect dots that aren't rationally connected pretty much out of the process until much later. Second from last, prove it first. Prove it. You need to fully demonstrate results before you move to the next step, particularly when big capital is involved, and reinvention usually requires it. The current process is designed to get it right for all time, pretty much, and not get it out there fast to learn from it so that we can strengthen our strategy and move forward. And in innovation, what we know is iteration, doing a bunch of smallish things in sequence that lead to bigger breakthroughs, is fundamental to actually creating breakthroughs. And this is a personal favorite. I've heard this many, many times. You can't do it that fast. You know, you don't get it, Joe or Karen or Phil. You need X months to do this part. You need Y months to do this part. You just don't understand the timeline. What I would suggest is that, I know there are rules and timelines to all of these things, but they were created as well in a time that was different. And the time it takes to do these things is actually just historical. So we would sort of put an X through these truths, and we would say, this actually has to cause us to think about how to reinvent retail differently. And the heart of it is, or the net of it is, it's way too slow. So retail moves at a pace. You probably don't want to hear from me that we need to actually pick up the pace, but we do. And if there's one idea I'd like to get across this morning in my remarks before we go to the panel, is that speed matters. Speed is an ally. The need for speed is there. Why? Well, I'm going to touch on why it's an ally in a moment, but let me give you a sneak preview or a summary preview of what the new era we've entered is. I understand from yesterday's agenda and speakers, a lot of conversation about where the consumer's going and how digital is impacting that. Well, here in 5 mercifully short clicks, I'll leave it to others to tell the deeper story, but here in 5 clicks is why we have entered a new era, the speed of customer era. Click 1. The technology in customers' hands is better than ours, and it's refreshing at a faster rate than ours. And in a mobile social world, this is a problem. 2, customers have always talked to each other about us, about retailers. Today, they just do it with astonishing frequency and in epic proportions. You know the old saw, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and they told 200 million friends, and they told 2 billion friends. That's the reality we're living in today, and it happens in a nanosecond. Speed. Today, consumers see value as a right and not a privilege because they can find it and compare it instantly. There's worse news. They are increasingly promiscuous in their brand, format, and channel choices, and they are quick to experiment with what's new. Imagine deciding to choose an item, search for an item. 1.75 billion options in 0.23 seconds. We've been disintermediated, in the extreme. And lastly, their shopping behavior is changing way faster than we are, which is causing all sorts of problems as well as opportunities. So that's why we believe speed must be an essential part of retail reinvention today. So how do we reinvent faster, and what are the implications? Well, now for some good news. Changing how we go about reinventing can actually accelerate the pace of change and improve the outcomes. I'll share with you how. Ask yourself this: are you one of the retailers that has momentum? Would you like to be? And without going into a deep grade 10 science lesson, I want to share one thing that you know already. So Newton said an object in motion tends to remain in motion, and an object at rest tends to remain at rest. So the formula you're familiar with, very simple. It means if an object's standing still, it has zero momentum. If it's moving, it has momentum. The bigger the object is and the faster it's moving, the more momentum, okay? So we have seen and experienced that this law applies to retail reinvention. The more mass and more speed, the more momentum. And mass, if you're a smaller retailer or a mid-size, mass isn't necessarily scale of organization, it's scale of change. Okay, so let's gather sort of all of this up into something that makes sense. So come with me. Speed is good because it creates momentum. Momentum is good because it's powerful, and therefore it has the power to flatten competitors and bring people along with it, crash through barriers, all these good things. So what stands in our way of moving faster to create momentum? We found there are 3 speed killers, and I'll touch on each along with the antidote to each. The 3 are outdated processes, which I mentioned, change aversion, and risk aversion. So the process first. The typical analytics and strategy leading to reinvention process takes about 18 to 24 months. If you say from the start to the day I can walk into a pilot store, and in it might be assortment change and new organization and store design and maybe customer experience changes and training and all sorts of things. As this pilot store has yet to be proven out, the rollout of which is probably not yet planned, or at least some months away. And the chances are that the online piece hasn't been recrafted to match. The marketing hasn't, because it's only true in a few places. And so here we are in pilot phase. Well, pilot phase, 18 to 24 months, is an eternity. We don't have time to do that kind of sequential piece anymore. So what we've learned, and we'd suggest to think about, is try a process where some steps in the that run in sequence are now done in parallel. You know, let's move to the new process where we put pressure on every step and the entire end-to-end process and say, we need to do it faster. It's just a simple thing when you say to people, I don't have that kind of time, I need to do it faster. Watch what happens. Involve the entire leadership team rather than a subset. You know, the speed that comes from just being aligned is tangible. Have consumer insight and creative people participate every step of the way and get strategic actions out of the lab and into the field faster so you can learn from them and refine your strategy. There's a leading software developer who says, if there aren't mistakes in my latest release, I know I've waited too long. That's what today's reality is about. And learning from a leader that I worked with many years ago, we really need to balance getting it right with getting on with it, more so today. Second speed killer is aversion to change. So organizations are organisms. You introduce something foreign, whether good or bad, and they react. So when a new idea is introduced, what happens? They mobilize to kill it or slow it down. We've learned that one of the ways for new ideas to survive, new ways of doing things, is to move faster than the white blood cells that are mobilizing against it to kill it. And it's really something fascinating to watch it in action. It's, wait a minute, that's changed. We don't do it that way. Whoa, it's already out there. That's what we have learned matters and is advantageous. And lastly, risk aversion. Does this one sort of seem a little familiar? This is where a clearly articulated and brutally honest case for change comes in. And we in retail, and I would say more broadly in business, are very practiced at identifying the risks of change. What we're not particularly good at is defining the risks of not changing. We need to get much better at understanding what the risks of not reinventing are. But human nature is such that people need a reason to change. to overcome risk aversion, you've got to be able to say, look, this is why. But the way we think about it is an inspiring purpose and a clear strategy is half the battle of overcoming risk aversion. The other half is to show them we're effed if we don't. And here's why. Deanne said there was only one rule. I couldn't swear from the stage. Okay, coming to a close. If we distill all this down to one word, what do you think the word is? Speed. Speed helps us keep pace with customers in a new environment. Speed helps us achieve more successful outcomes when we do it in the new way. Speed creates momentum inside the business as well as on the street, and that's what we want. So perhaps there's an acronym in it, a useful mnemonic, if you will. Bill Durnan's in the audience, he taught me that word, mnemonic. Maybe it goes like this. Start early. Purpose, have one, and use facts and feelings to find yours. Engage and collaborate. Bring more people into the process. It sounds cumbersome, but it actually really pays dividends. The more people help to create it, the more they support it, and the more they're aligned to make it real. And that drives speed. Experiment and energize. Don't wait too long. Don't make it perfect. Get it out there and let it happen and learn from it and keep that going. That's what real innovation and moving forward is. And then finally, do it. If you're waiting, don't do it. Understand what's happening, and when you do it differently. The last word I'll give to somebody a lot wiser, Gotha. By the way, I had to go to YouTube to learn how to pronounce Gotha. I would have said goth. Whatever you can do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Thank you very much for the time and attention.